ahead and get started. And for the main part of the discussion, one of the nice things about Zoom is that Andrew can turn people's mics on and off. And we'll probably have you on mute so that Dean doesn't lose his train of thought. I mean, it's easily done. So we need to protect Dean on that. And I just want to thank you all for coming. This is totally an experiment, courtesy of Andrew Opeka. He said, hey, we ought to be able to try this and see if we can get some contact with all of our members, since we missed a lot of stuff this year, like conventions and Pebble Beach and all that. And this way we can have some camaraderie and fun and learn some stuff about our members that we might not otherwise know. So with that as a short introduction, Andrew, you want to say whatever ground rules you've got, and we'll get it over to Dean to wax eloquently.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, John. And as he said, you know, today's our first episode, if you want to call it that, of the Gull Wing Group Member Spotlight. So today we've got Dean Johnson, which I'm proud to be able to interview here today. And just a few ground rules, if everybody can put their microphone on mute. And then just so everyone is aware, we are recording this so we can add it to the archive video on our website. So if there's anything that you don't want seen or heard, that's your fair warning, as it will be recording to the cloud. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and a brief introduction of myself. I'm in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Been a member for 6 years, and I'm proud to be hosting tonight. So with that, Dean, why don't you take it away? If you want to provide us with a quick introduction, I'm going to make your video a spotlight so everybody only sees yourself. And if you can give some information about yourself, that would be great.
Okay. So one thing I wanted to add, please write down pluses and minuses for this meeting so we can improve it as we go along. So this truly is the experiment. This is the first time. So keep track of any suggestions and improvements, and we'll be happy to take those. So my background, I have a wife who is really a Gull Wing widow and 2 full-grown children. I grew up in the southwest part of Minnesota. You'll hear more about that later. Then moved to Minneapolis, then to the Bay Area in San Francisco, California, and I escaped there and now live in, we're retired and live in Reno, Nevada. And yeah, I've had the Gull Wing. This is a picture from my garage. The Gull Wing in the background is one that I've owned since 1971, and it seems like I've worked on it since 1971. And so I'll go through and tell you what you know. We'll talk about the club and the Gull Wing and me.
Yeah, just we're going to learn about that a bit later. But tell us a little bit about why you joined the club.
One quick footnote, if I might. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a tab where it says chat. Anybody that has a question as he's going along, you can tap that and send it to Andrew, or it may come, I don't know who it'll come to. You can send it to Andrew or me, and we'll make sure that your question gets asked at the end of the presentation. And we're going to open up the mics at the end so that as people ask, so we can answer and ask questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.
So my best summary for why I joined the Gull Wing Group is I bought this car, and I joined out of desperation would be the best words. I had no shop manual. There was nothing published about working on this car at all. I'd fallen in love with it and bought it. And finally, it was clear it was not running well. It wasn't going to continue running at all unless I found a shop manual. So I talked to Mercedes Benz via mail. They finally sent me a letter, connected me to Chad Hunt at the Gull Wing Group, and I could buy a shop manual and a membership. And that's what I did. So it was a desperate move. I couldn't do anything with the car without the shop manual. So I joined the club, and it was the best thing I did. I've been a member since 1971. I look forward to each star letter. and meeting members and so on. So it's been a great thing. And in terms of how long have I been a member, I say it's been a long time. And the only proof I have is this picture. This is 1971. That's Gull Wing, and that's me. And at that time, we were both pretty dangerous. But we've both turned into what you see in the picture now. So much calmer. And the Gull Wings, the Gull Wing Group's been my source for all the information on the Gull Wing, and all the friendships that surround the Gull Wing.
Yeah, that's been exceptional, and we're so proud to have you since 1971. That's quite the time. Was Chad Hunt the first president, as you can recall? I think.
No, actually, that was the business office, and Lynn Yakel's the one who talked me into the membership, because I couldn't get the shop manual copy without joining the club first. So you can see how this leverage works. So the two of them convinced me it would be a good thing for me to spend a little more money and join, and then I could have a shop manual. And once I had the shop manual, I felt like I had finally had the keys to the car. So that's another story.
Well, that's great. So with regards to the car, tell us why you were specifically interested in the 300 SL.
My background's mechanical engineering. It's a mechanical engineering marvel. There's no other word for it. It was innovative, it's revolutionary, as it's proven to be. It's a timeless car. Styling, and best of all, at age 20, it was damn fast. So all those things kind of played a role in picking the car out the first time around.
How many?
In the long run, as you get more perspective, I really had a lot of respect for the people, not especially for the car, but the people who pulled off this fantastic feat. They were given a tough job. They were determined to win. They used parts that they had in their back pocket, practically put together an absolutely breathtaking, stunning mechanical beast that won races. And fortunately, they built a few for the public to buy, and I fortunately was lucky enough to find one. So they just did the impossible with humble beginnings, and I like that. That's my outstanding stamp of approval.
So Dean, tell us how many speeding tickets you've got with your husband.
I've been stopped a few times, but usually a tour of the car will end the ticket discussion. The car came with a radar speeding ticket from Chicago in the pocket on the driver's side at 139 miles an hour, timed from radar from a overpass. And there was a Mercedes Benz mechanic at the wheel that I met later. I was not my car at the time. That was long before I bought it. But that's how they were road testing it, and they got snapped on the freeway. So it's a capable car.
Absolutely. And your specific car is a very, very early car. It was a 1954 300 SL. So tell us a little bit about how you found that specific car and your buying experience.
So the car behind you is my car, and it's the 67th one built. It used to be ivory until I sanded all the paint off from it, but ivory paint will go back on it. It has red leather interior, and it came with all of that and two very bald original racing tires on it that were the ones that are listed on the build sheet. I found it. I was a friend of mine in high school. His dad owned this car, and he drove it every now and then. It was mostly stored, and it didn't run very well then either. But I was just enamored by the car. There's no other way to put it. I fell in love with this car, and so I started pestering this friend's dad to buy the car. And I was in college, and every time I went home, I'd pester him. I lived in a small town in southwestern Minnesota, kind of where South Dakota laps over into Minnesota, and the chances of there being a Gull Wing there was next to zero, but there it was. And I pestered him, and finally he was a good friend of my dad's, and he made this deal with me so that my dad wouldn't get angry either over buying this car. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to sell the car. You can have it for 60 days and don't pay me anything. You can work on it. If you can make it run well enough that you want to buy it, then I'll take your money at the end of 60 days. So I spent 2 months trying to make the car run. I finally got it to run smoothly up to about 4,000 RPM. It didn't matter. I'd already fallen in love with the car, and I bought it anyway. But that was the deal. It was just sheer chance that I lived in this small town, and this guy had a Gull Wing in his grandmother's garage that he'd stored for 8 or 9 years, and I was able to buy it. The buying it didn't go very smoothly. I had the money thanks to the only rich aunt in the family, and it was my college tuition money, and I spent it on the Gull Wing. And so my dad, I think, secretly liked that idea. My mother, that was not a good idea at all for me. And so I got a lot of flack and so on it, but it turned out to be a pretty good investment in the long run. But I say I was just lucky, was able to buy it, and then I found out what I bought afterwards, like most used cars, right? So.
Did you actually wait the 60 days, or did you?
Yeah, I spent 60 days. My dad and I spent 2 months working on it. It barely ran. In fact, we towed it from the guy's his grandmother's garage over to my dad's shop. My dad was a international harvester dealer in this small town, so we had a truck and farm equipment dealership that I grew up in. So I had a place to work on it, and so it got kind of squeezed between 2 stalls, and we spent 2 months trying to make it run right. And it had the usual stuff, the blown injection diaphragm, the bad plugs, bad injectors, and so on and so on. And we had no shop manual, so we were really struggling with this thing. And finally got it to run fairly decently up to like 4,000 RPM. That was it, and it just. It was fun. It was amazing. It was already an amazing car, even though it didn't run very well.
Did you use it as your daily driver? Your primary car?
No, I had a very rusty '63 Oldsmobile. It was my daily driver. This one didn't run well enough to be even a weekly driver at the time.
Hey, Andrew, get a little closer to the mic. It's a little hard to hear you at times.
Sure, no problem.
There, that's better.
All right, and Dean, tell us a little about some of the mechanical skills, even at your age, that you acquired in order to get the car running.
I was pretty lucky. I had grown up in this dealership. I'd loved mechanical stuff from day one. So I grew up in this dealership. I sold parts. I got to work in the shop for a while. He had a couple outstanding mechanics and a guy that was a magician with a welder. And when I was working there, these guys taught me all kinds of mechanical skills and engine rebuilding skills and welding skills. And best of all, we were a authorized Bosch fuel injection dealer for diesel engines and so on. And so we had a guy there that was just fantastic with diesel pumps and injectors. So when we saw this injection system, it was no surprise. We were able to, I was able to do a lot of work with that I picked up over the years. So just dumb luck. In a small town, you learn how to do just about anything because there's no place you're going to go very easily. You're 150 miles from civilization. So.
But you were lucky in the fact that you had a Bosch dealer.
Yeah, we were the Bosch dealer. We had a little trouble convincing Bosch that they should sell us gasoline injection parts because we were a Bosch diesel dealer. But after a while, they sold us parts. I put all new injectors in it. That was one of the problems, and I had to pay the terrible price of $32 an injector at the time, and I wasn't smart enough to buy a box full. I'd be a rich man by now.
Right.
So we had to pump all apart. We recalibrated it. We didn't have the right calibrating fluids. We got the happy idea to calibrate it with gasoline. And so there's a small pump room that's got clean air filters and all that stuff to keep the air clean. And my dad walks in smoking a cigarette while we're spraying gasoline all over the room with with the calibration system. Yeah. I thought we were going to be gone in a flash, but we got him out of there before anything dastardly happened.
Wow, excellent. Well, share us a story or two about your car and including some of the driving experiences.
Well, when I first started driving the car, once it was running well enough, or I thought it was running well enough, my first discovery was vapor lock, which we still talk about today. The difference with me is I had an auxiliary pump but didn't know it was bad, right? So, and it just did not work very well. So as I started driving it in the summer and it was warm, I discovered that it would vapor lock and stop. And so out of desperation, I wrapped a towel around the injection pump and disconnected the hose from the windshield washer and put it down into the towel. And I kept the towel wet. That kept the injection pump cool enough. And you could drive for an hour or so at 90 degrees before it would vapor lock, and then you were stuck by the side of the road for another half an hour, 45 minutes. And so that was part of my early driving experience. And then I discovered the amazing thing that if you increase the speed, the fuel pressure goes up, and it doesn't vapor lock. You can go a while longer before it vapor locks. The problem with this kind of situation is your speed is steadily increasing, and so in my notebook it says that at 90 miles an hour, you're still doing okay. You're not vapor locked, but the slightest lift on the pedals, if you get tangled up with the traffic, and you have to back off, let up on the throttle, you're coasting in a heartbeat. It's just snap, done, and you're coasting instead of driving. And all the people you passed, for the past 40, 50 miles at 90 miles an hour, they're all going by you laughing and waving while you're sitting alongside the road waiting for the car to cool off. So that was one of the early driving experiences, probably not so good. I had some run-ins with the police, but they were all friendly. This again, early on, I used to drive out to my parents' lake cabin. It was about a 200-mile drive, and I used to stop at this restaurant. It was a local restaurant about halfway there, and so did the highway patrol. So around and back, but the door locks didn't work, so I was always looking for a fairly safe place to park the car. And so I thought, and they always park their cars with a space in between. Why, I don't know. So I'd always pull in between and park between the two Minnesota Highway Patrol cars that were in the back there. They were always inside having dinner. They didn't know me. And that went on for most of the summer. I came out one night, and they were there with their flashlights looking in the inside of the car. And they were looking at the speedometer. And my car came with a 180 mile per hour speedometer. So they were kind of embarrassed, and they said, this is during the double nickel 55 mile an hour speed limit, which barely gets you out of third gear. And so they're looking in the window, and they turned around, they're kind of embarrassed. And they said, well, how fast does it really go? And I said, it never goes over 55 miles an hour. And they burst out laughing. I saw them all the time on the road. I never had a minute's trouble. I used to sometimes pull over and help other people that were stopped, and they'd show up there too. So they knew who I was. It was the only Gull Wing, within probably 500 miles of there. So I was pretty easy to spot. Never had any trouble. They were always good to me. So even though I sometimes had a little speed problem,
Yeah, as most of us do, right, Dean?
Yeah. The other crazy part in Minnesota is you have a lot of hailstorms. So with a Gull Wing, you're always chasing your way out of a hailstorm someplace, and occasionally, in an emergency, I'd drive onto a farm place and drive in their barn or something, or the haymow that had an opening on the one end, and wait for the hailstorm to go by. And usually it was a fairly quick thing. And I was out in the western part of Minnesota, could see the hail coming, and so I parked on an underpass on the freeway. And right next to the sign that says no parking under the underpass, on the freeway. So that was fine. I'm watching the hail come, and another Minnesota Highway Patrol guy pulls up behind me, and he's doing the same thing. He's going to hide from the hail too. The trouble is that I had just driven by my exit, and my plan was to back up to the exit and take the exit. Otherwise, I had to go another 25 miles into North Dakota. So we wait out the storm, and he's waiting for me to leave, and I'm waiting for him to leave. And finally he gets out of his car, and I thought, okay, here's the ticket for parking under the underpass. So I gave him a tour of the car. He really wanted to see the car. And so I told him my dilemma, and he said, I won't be back here for about 10 or 15 minutes. So he said, I suggest you do whatever you're going to do before I get back, and we'll call it a day. So I said I'd encounter a lot of encounters like that where a tour of the car really saved the day with the police activity, shall we put it. And it was always the driving part was always fun. The car attracts attention. People like the car. I've never had anybody walk up and say that's a terrible car. They're always interested, and it seemed like people that have on the badge also like the car as well, as long as you're polite and so on.
Well, that's great, Dean. Tell us one of the things that you find most intriguing about your Gull Wing specifically.
Well, it's an early car, so it has, as one of the things I should mention, I do almost all of my own work on the car. So over the years, as I've done work on it, you find little things that aren't on the later cars or were improved significantly on the later cars. I think, and I was kind of lucky. The original owner for the car, I've never met him, but I met the mechanic, Mercedes mechanic that took care of the car when it was brand new, and had to deal with the original owner. And when I met this mechanic, he was very angry with the original owner because Mercedes was sending out upgrade parts for the car, and the owner wouldn't let him put the upgrade parts on because he thought the car would be slower when he got all done putting the updated parts on. So the car was very original, and the guy I bought it from had it stored for 9 years practically. So it was original right down to the good stuff and bad stuff were all on the car. So that was kind of neat. And I didn't have money to restore it, so it stayed fairly original for a long time. Some of the crazy stuff on it is the engine was an early engine. It doesn't have any timing marks on it, no timing pointer or anything. So when I got the shop manual, I thought, gee, this is great. I can finally time this engine, figure out how to do it. And the shop manual has no, it doesn't talk anything about the early engines. It didn't have pointers and so on. Eventually, I ended up marking the front damper and putting a pointer on and doing the timing. But just little stuff like that. It had an experimental, still has an experimental Bosch throttle body on it, or air controller. It's a V series part, which is an experimental part. So I went to monkey with the jets and change the jetting a little bit and how much fuel is delivered in various spots. But my air controller doesn't look quite like the ones in the shop manual. You have to dig around to figure out what you're doing with that thing. I still have it. It's still on there, and it had other kind of crazy little features on it that just came on the early engines. The rear axle quit after a couple hundred miles after I finished with the engine. The boot split, let all the oil out of it, and I discovered its serial number was 28, and it's in car 67. That seemed kind of odd. And after the past few years, I was looking at early cars, and they did a rework cycle where all the rear axles came out of the early cars because they decided to change ratios. Newer ones went in, and then cars later down the line got the very early rear axles that had their rear axle ratio changed. So it had that little nuance in it, and along with that came the very large wheel cylinders on the brakes in the back. So the car tended to lock the back brakes pretty bad, and that came along with this these real early parts. So I changed all that out. And the cutest part about the rear axle was in the shop manual, there's a little note that says, oh, by the way, if you have an early car, put the bolts that mount it in from the other direction. And what they did on these first cars is the bolts that hold the rear axle in position, they were dropped in from the top, and then the nut was put on the bottom. And so you had no way, that was done without the body on the car. So when you go to drive the bolts up to get them out of there, they hit the body shell and you can't get them out all the way. And of course, you have the threaded hole that you're supposed to connect the puller to pull them out because they're big. That's on the top instead of on the bottom where you can't even see it. I thought, well, that's a little one-liner in the shop manual for you to remember. The last few years, I've worked on the body shell a lot. It has its own little nuances. I think a lot of the early car really stands out in the body shell. Their stampings were early stampings. Some of them were trimmed by hand. Some of them had the flanges turned by hand instead of stamped. So there's a lot of personality, if you will, in the way the body shell is put together, which is pretty neat. The way the body shell was designed, the prints were made, it would not fit over the frame. They couldn't mount the body on the frame. The frame had parts that stuck out too far. So on an early car like this, there's big hammered clearance bumps in the wheel wells in the back and one in the front, so that the body can actually be put on the frame. And they're literally, it's just a big ball peen hammer strikes in the inside of the fender well, or I mean the inside of the wheel well. And those disappeared by about car number 90, but the early cars all have that nice big hammered spot on each side. And I think the other thing that's most noticeable is it has the door seals on the early cars are very shallow, very thin, and then later they made them deeper so they actually seal. So when you have the delight of driving in a Minnesota rainstorm, the first thing you notice is the water's coming in, and then it drips down over the, not even drips, it pours in pretty fast right above the visors and lands in your lap. That gets your attention after a while. And, it was just part of having not such good door seals. And it's kind of a built-in feature on the very early cars. The doors have to be fit really well if you're going to keep the water out in a good hard rain. So that's in a desert like Reno, I'm not expecting that kind of a problem. But those are all kind of the kind of things that you see on the early car. Early cars had ZF steering gear. It's not a good steering gear. It wears easily, and it's very fast. It's about a turn and 3/4 lock to lock. So that takes a little getting used to. And if you're parking it, you really it's a good thing it's a big steering wheel. So that came on the early ones. And just other little funny parts. The radiator is a little different. The tanks are different. The brakes were sort of, I don't want to say non-functional, but they certainly weren't very good. They had racing shoes, a small treadle vac booster, and an electric vacuum valve, a solenoid valve that worked most of the time, but not all the time. And just things that the part about Mercedes I really liked was they designed all these problems out, almost in the first 100 cars. When you look at the parts book, the changes are, they already knew the Roadster was coming. The Roadster was already well on its way and was going to replace the Gull Wing. And they stuck with this car, and they made change after change after change to make it more drivable, more fixable, more reliable. And so it's really fun to see that, like the first 200 cars, there's just an amazing amount of work that went into making it a much more drivable experience than the very early ones.
Dean, you've shared with me in the past, some of the reasons for why, engine one didn't go in body one. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, engine one didn't do very well. They had a fair amount of trouble with the engines at the beginning. As they were starting the production line. From what I can tell from the serial numbers and so on, I think they were quite difficult to build. They had not built very many test engines with the direct fuel injection. So as they tried to field them, and not even field them, these cars had to be driven. These early cars had no timing marks, and they were driven to tune them. So in the process of driving them and tuning them, the factory guys, I think they ran into engine trouble that required swaps. So when you look at the serial number progressions in the early cars, you see the serial numbers for the engines jump around quite a bit. And in the middle of all that, there's also the body shells were reworked as well. Some of those were pulled off the line, changed, and reappear later, like the rear axles and so on. So there's tremendous change going on really in the first 70, 80, 90 cars. And they juggled on this line, they were late delivering, and they juggled all these configurations and changes and so on. And once they started shipping cars, they on a pretty regular basis, they came out the door. There's a couple weeks where they, a week, 2 week, 1 week intervals where they didn't ship because they were doing rework. You can see it in the serial numbers what was going on. But man, they were great at it. That's a lot of. I've run companies with production lines with low volume, high tech stuff that doesn't always work right out of the bat. You're pushing the performance curve like crazy, and that's the boat these people are in. They did a great job with it. So the early cars didn't stay early very long. They got cleaned up pretty fast.
Yeah, and Dean, I think you've really become an expert on some of those original 100 or so cars. Tell us about how you kind of started that process and how you acquired some of that information on them.
So I was enamored with the early cars and the process they went through to make them later cars, almost from the beginning when I got this car. So I was always on the lookout for early cars. I took lots of pictures. I found out whatever I could from factory information and so on. And after a while, when I started really looking, and I had this car part, you can see some of the problems that that were probably driving them nuts on the production line. And then you see those, you see in the parts and in the serial numbers, you can see how they worked out some of the issues. The doors, there's not much written anywhere about the doors, but the doors were a problem at the beginning. I think both the fit and the way they decided, the geometry they were using at the beginning was a bit of a problem, which they fixed quickly. It was by car 40, the doors had changed and they were on their way. So it's just been a lifelong occupation, if you will. Wherever I see a scrap of information about early gull wings, I grab it.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. Well, Dean, obviously your car is behind you and you are in the restoration process. So tell us a little bit about the process of the restoration and where you're at in that process.
I'm gonna do this in two pieces. The car, I had 2 stages of restoration. In 1971, I had very serious drivetrain issues. And at that age, you don't care so much about what the body shell looks like. You just care how fast it goes. So I'll talk a little bit about the 1971 restoration, and then this one started in 2008. Mistake starting it while you're still working, but nonetheless, I did it. But first, the 1971 restoration was primarily drivetrain, and that's lasted until now. But the sad part of the story is I'd had the car for 2 months. It didn't run very well. It didn't run very well at all above 4,000 RPM, and I didn't know what kind of noises it was supposed to make. I'd never been around another gull wing, hardly even another Mercedes. So I've got and there's no timing pointer. The only timing mark is the flywheel has a pointer underneath the car. Very, very handy, right? So I got the car up in stands. I'm underneath it in a creeper, and I'm coming out from underneath the car, and I reach up with my hands and I grab the damper on the front of the crankshaft to pull myself out from underneath the car, and it moved. I thought, oh, the damper's bad. So I'm wiggling around with it some more, and I realized the damper's okay. It's the crankshaft that's going up and down. This is not a good thing. Yeah. So that led to the restoration of the engine, and I did that all in my dad's shop out in the small town. I was in Minneapolis. I was living in Minneapolis at the time, going to school. So I ordered parts. It took forever to get all the parts for it. It needed almost everything. I used castings over again and some moving parts, but by and large, any wear part was worn. It had been just poorly maintained. And there were some challenges there. If you look in the shop manual, it says to replace the guides and so on in the head, you have to heat it to, I think it was 350 degrees or something like that. And we didn't have any way of heating it. But the bakery downtown said they would heat it for me after they did all their baked goods. I thought, oh, state inspector time, this would be great. But so they heated the cylinder head for us, and we took the head apart, put it all back together again. They say we were a Bosch dealer, so we built the pumps, pump and injectors. Nobody would bore the block. I took the block to Minneapolis. The top's cut at a 20-degree angle, and everybody said, "No, you're done," and we're not touching it. So I ended up boring that by hand, and that took about a day per hole to do that, and got that all fitted. So finally, and while I had this car was all torn apart in my dad's shop, stuck between two stalls. And it took about a year to get all the parts. Mercedes had decided they weren't going to build many Gull Wing parts anymore in 1971, so it took a while to get the whole thing collected. And when I took it apart, I had neatly put all of the collected parts in groups and used the Folgers coffee cans. Remember the tin coffee cans you used to be able to get? Well, I had everything separated into coffee cans. So I finally got the engine all put together. I'm working at my dad's place in the summer. I had the engine put together, and I have two pieces left in one of the Folgers cans, and I can't find any place to put them. I went through the shop manual, I went through the parts manual, and at the coffee clutch every morning, everybody's asking me, when I'm going to put it back in the car and start it up. And so they're kind of razzing me. By day 3, they know it's all assembled. I told them I'm all ready, but I can't find out where these two pieces in this Folgers coffee can go, right? And they kept a straight face through this whole thing. And I was a little suspicious that I was being played a trick, but the part was metric, and it looked like, and there were no metric parts in a small town out in Minnesota at that time. So I'm digging through everything. Finally, I said, I'm going to put it in the car and I'm going to start it. And whatever falls off or doesn't turn, then I'll know where the piece goes. And so I confessed during the coffee meeting, and they all just burst out laughing. They had loaded one of the coffee cans with a piece off from a German diesel engine that International made. They had it that they'd overhauled, and they got the happy idea, let's give Dean a bad time. We're going to throw this in one of his coffee cans. So I was the butt of the joke there for months in that part of the restoration. But it all turned out well. They all went back together again. At the end of 1,000 miles, I talked to the mechanic that was up in Minneapolis and worked on the car. It was new, and I said, I'm at 1,000 miles. I said, what do I do to finish the break-in? He said, the only thing you can do to seat the rings is you got to drive for several hours at 100 miles an hour. I thought, oh, this should be good ticket material. So I laid out a course. Interstate 94 going west out of Minneapolis had just been finished to Fargo, North Dakota, and to a little ways west in North Dakota. So at dawn, 4:30 in the morning, I get the Gull Wing, and once I get out of the Twin Cities area, put it at 100 miles an hour, and drove across the state and into North Dakota, turned around and came back. No tickets, no cars. The thing had just opened. There's nobody around. And believe me, that is a great speed for a Gull Wing. It's just at home at 100 miles an hour. It kind of squats down a little bit, and it just runs like a top. It was great. So that was the first restoration. It included a rear axle rebuild that I didn't want to do, but had to do. There was no choice there. After that rebuild, I never reached the top speed. I couldn't get the Mercedes wheel weights, so I was using regular American wheel weights. I glued them on, I taped them on, I glued and taped. I did everything I knew how to do to keep the wheel weights on the rims. But at 130, the wheel weights had come off, and the Michelin tires I had they were so lumpy, or had a big overlap, so that they were real heavy on one side. And the weights had come off, and the car would just go crazy. So I still had plenty of power left at 130, but I was never able to top end it because I didn't have the wheel weights to do it with the Michelin tires I had. But I declared that part of the restoration successful, in that I could do a clean 130 before I heard all the weights go. And the speedometer was always wrong on the car. But if you're a Minnesota farm boy like I was, or from that area, the county roads are all a mile apart. So you go down another county road where they're all perpendicular, and when you're at 30 seconds per county road, you're doing 120, and then use your stopwatch and you can calculate your speed very accurately. So the 130 was an actual 130. It was a fun thing. So then there was this era that followed that where I drove it, and then you have kids and all the other things that happen in your life when you have jobs and kids, and so I was driving it periodically, and about 2008, the rust just exploded. This car had been a Midwest car all its life, until we had moved to California, and it turns out it was absolutely loaded with salt and rust and previous rust repairs that I sort of knew they were there, but I had no idea how bad they were. So I thought, okay, I'm going to fix this rust. And long story short, everything below the headlights in the front of the car and everything, the bottom foot of the sheet metal all the way around the car is all new, and all, a good share of the wheel wells and so on were replaced as well, the bottom foot. The rust was amazing. Salt corrodes most, anything, but these cars had not been dipped in primer. They were sprayed with primer, but the dipping fills the seams. The spray did not. So the seams rotted out. It was a terrible mess. So I looked at it and I thought, well, it's time to learn a new skill, and that's making sheet metal panels for the car, because I needed so many of them, and none of them were available really. There was no replacement sheet metal at the time. So I took lessons on fabricating parts using English wheels, stretchers, shrinkers, bead rollers, and slowly equipped myself with all this stuff, and a TIG welder to do the seam welding. And I've made all the parts, and I can say today I'm done welding on the steel part of the body shell. It's all done. It's all finished. But when you look in the background there, the bottom part, anything underneath the vents, anything under the headlights and under the taillights, that's all new metal. And I did it. One of the reasons I did it is I wanted to keep the shape or the feel of a 1954 car. The first thing you learn is the left side and the right side are not identical, so the templates on one side are not going to fit the other side. But I felt that was part of it was part of the car. And while it would be easier to just stick new parts on it and make it perfect, I really wanted to keep it preserved, if you will, as an example of how these first cars were built. So I tried to preserve the same shape, the same mistakes, if you will, and put the car back together again. And now in the background there, you can see it. It's say the steel part's all welded. It's all done. I'm going to shoot primer here in the next week or two, and I'm onto the aluminum parts. I do have some aluminum welding to do here and there, but I'm winding down. But it's taken a long time. That was probably the most challenging work I've done. But after a while, when you start to get the hang of it, my joke is instead of making it 4 times to get one that's good, you only make 2, and the part's good. In the background above the car there, you can see the templates hanging out of the way here. There's templates that I used to make all the parts with. I had a great instructor. His name was Lazi Jensen. He's well known worldwide for sheet metal work. He's got lots of videos on YouTube and so on. And when I signed up for his lesson, because I had kind of reached a point where I couldn't go any further without some good instruction, so I saw his course online. It was a in his shop course for 5 days, and I signed up for it, and it didn't say where it was. So I was living in Pleasanton, California at the time. So I called Lazi and I said, I've signed up for your course. My credit card's there, but I don't know where you're located. Where do I get plane tickets to? He said, well, I'm in Pleasanton, California. It turns out he lived 2 miles away from me. And so he was a great help. I learned a lot in his class. And when I got to really tough spots, I'd go over there and get some advice. And it was great. It was a great help. So I'm at the stage of putting pieces back on and doing final fitting. You can see the eyebrows are hanging on the car. That was a major accomplishment. Rocker panels and so on. I got to put every piece back on and try it before I paint. That's where I'm at.
Oh, it looks excellent, Dean. We can't wait to see it finished.
Me too. It would be nice to drive it instead of weld on it.
Well, tell us about, you talked about some of the skills that you had to learn. What are some of the primary shops or suppliers that you had used through the process?
I do a lot of my own work, but in terms of parts, the sheet metal parts, I start with flat metal and I shape it all. But other parts, a lot of people, Art Thumwood, he and I have, he's supplied me with bits and pieces that I can't find anywhere else. Tom Hansen at the Classic Center, I get parts from the Classic Center as well. Lynn Yackel is gone now, but I bought a lot of parts from Lynn. He had stuff early. He had an early car himself. He had car 18. And so he usually knew what I was talking about when I was trying to describe something that I couldn't find anywhere else. And he usually had one, and I would get it. Steve Marks has helped me out with some great parts. Eric Jeltness at Jeltness Restorations helped me with some parts. And then Bob Cerna. You know Bob Cerna? He's on here. Bob has his own supply of Gull Wing parts and then Speed Gull Wing parts. So I'm happy to say that the wheels that are going to go on this car, I have the original wheels, but they require tubes and lots of monkey work. And Bob offered me the opportunity to buy a set of DOT Gull Wing wheels that have DOT rims, can run modern tubeless tires, and so on. I said yes. So I got them, and then he called me up and he said, I got to have them back. He said, I need to put them on my Bonneville car. So I said, okay, my car is not going anywhere for a while. So the 4 wheels that go on this car came off his land speed record Gull Wing, and they were tested to 191 miles per hour. So I'm very proud to have those on my car. And then he's also got a collection of hard to find, no longer available hardware. I have a nice set of Roadster brakes that are going to go on here and so on. So people in the Gull Wing group have been really great, with parts, and so are the suppliers. Oh, I know another. I looked for there's two other good parts I should tell you about. I looked for field coils for the generator for years, and Renee had a set one day. I just, out of the clear blue, bought those, had looked for them for years. And the worst one is the ZF steering gear has a worm gear in it that wears badly. And Steve Marks had an early car as well with the same problem, but he knew a place that could probably make the gear. So we got together, we did a lot of measurements, monkeying around, and Steve had the steering gear part remanufactured, and there's only 150 cars that have that steering gear on it, and a lot of them have had it replaced with the later style Mercedes steering gear. But there's an example of great guy in the Gull Wing group, had this part made, sold me one for a reasonable price, and I'll have to install it one of these days. But those are just examples of great places great people in the Gull Wing group that help you out with parts and knowledge and whatever you need to get the job done. Pat Matthews is online here. I've gotten parts from Pat. Door springs, they're waiting to go in. Things like that. Just things you can't get anywhere else. They show up inside the Gull Wing group.
And the knowledge from everybody that's willing to share, like yourself.
Yeah. Why does this piece look like that? How should this be set? How should this look? Since that part's rusted away. So you asked me about skills. I did forget one thing about the skills. Let me go back for a second. So the other part of the skill set you need for this car is driving it. And I was 20 years old. I'd driven this wonderful rusted out 63 Oldsmobile and a few other odds and ends. I'd never driven a car that had almost no brakes. The steering gear, you could adjust it for two settings, either loose, so in the center it had lots of play, or if you got that too tight, then when you turned to full lock, it would stick there, and it was stuck hard. You really had a heck of a time getting out of the turn because the steering gear was locked there. So that was a skill you had to master. the vapor lock, that was a great skill you had to master. It had the oversteer from the rear axle. That I played with a lot on a parking lot off and on, so I understood that. But the brakes, the sticky steering, the vapor lock, those all happened at 3-digit speeds. And those are driving skills you acquired that were special to an early Gull.
Hey, Dean, you commented that you actually found the mechanic that took care of the car from the first owner.
Yes.
And I understand that he actually gave you something. You want to relate that story?
So the original owner wouldn't let this mechanic update the car. So there were updates to the distributor drive gears, a bunch of little odds. The distributor drive gears were a big expensive deal, but there were other parts in that had been changed that this guy couldn't change. So when I met him, he had an independent shop, Mercedes shop in Minneapolis. And I met him and I got to know him, and he knew the car. I'd showed up with the car to ask him how much it would cost to get the engine fixed. And he said he had given the previous owner an estimate of time and materials unknown. And so I got that same estimate. That's when I decided I was going to have to do this myself. But anyway, as I got to know him well or better, he went inside his shop one day. He came out with a box and he said, "Here's all the parts that were supposed to go on your car from Mercedes." And in there was a gear set and some points, distributor parts, all kinds of little odds and ends that Mercedes had sent out to have installed on these cars by the factory mechanics over in Chicago. And they updated the cars that were around the Chicago area. So I ended up with this box full of parts. Then he also had a small warehouse, which had been his old shop. He'd built a new one. And he said, I can't remember, I was looking for some part. And he said, he handed me the keys to this old warehouse. And he said, dig around in there for a while. And he said, drag out by the door there what you want. He said, I want to get rid of the building and all the stuff in it. So pull all the stuff to the door that you want. And then we'll haggle over the price, and I'll help you load it in the back of your Oldsmobile, right? And so I go in there, and there's a 300 SL block, and it's one with a duplex pump like I've got, a short block. So I dragged that over by the door. Then I found an injection pump, so I put that over by the door. And I found some other pieces, thermostats, odds and ends. And so I dragged the whole thing over by the door. And I had no idea what this is going to be. So I talked to him for a bit, and he looked over the pile, and he said, I'll help you put it in your car for $75. So I bought the short block pumps and all this stuff for $75, threw it in the back of my car, and came home. I still have the short block. It's underneath the car.
Oh, that's excellent.
So that was just one of those lucky days. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know if my block was any good at that point. That was 71. And I thought I better have a backup here in case I find a crack or something in it that I don't know about yet. So, and go ahead.
Your block ended up being all right?
Yeah, my block was fine. The one that he sold me for $75 along with the other parts had some machining issues, but they're all fixable. And I said to him, what happened to it? Because the crank and the bearings are gone. He said, well, it ran out of oil. And I said, well, how did it run out of oil? And he said, well, the hose between the tank and the engine broke. And so there's more to this story. I said, how did that happen? He said, well, they said there was a telephone pole parked right up by the windshield there. He said, jumped out in the road in front of me. So apparently he had some kind of a terrible accident with the Gull Wing. And the engine and other parts, that was all he had left was the engine and some other stuff. But it took a while for me to get to the telephone pole part of the story.
That's excellent, Dean. Thank you so much for sharing. Did you have anything else?
Yeah, I'm avoiding telephone poles like crazy. So
I bet. And as ever.
No, that's. I mean, I'll answer any questions. Hopefully, that was if not helpful, entertaining. So
So let's
not too boring.
Let's open it up to everyone. I'll switch off the spotlight, and let's have everyone ask any questions. Just take yourself off of mute and go ahead and ask if you're interested or have something to ask.
I have a question for Dean. Bob Cerna here.
Hi,
Dean,
Bob.
you bought the car before you were married, if I'm not mistaken. You were only 21 or 20 when you bought it?
I was 20 and definitely unmarried.
How long did you own it before you met your lovely wife, Tony?
We got married when I was 30. So I had 10 years of uninhibited gull winging.
Was there any kind of a jealousy issue between your marriage relationship and your relationship with your car?
No, not really.
Good. Not the time you spent with your car.
This is all on tape, you know. We're recording this.
Well, now that you're working on it so much, has that caused any stress?
No, it's kind of a half day project. I get to spend 4 or 5 hours a day, not all days, but no, it's been good entertainment for me. Always wanted to do it.
So Dean, a quick question. I assume you still have the treadle back in it?
Yes, but I do have all the parts to get rid of it. So.
You may have an opportunity to have another exciting experience. I found, I guess 2 years ago, I'd just done a bunch of work on my car to change out the wiring, the spark plug wires and stuff. And I was taking it out for a test drive, and I was really proud. It was running really good. And then I stepped on the brakes. And I stepped as hard as I possibly could on the brakes. I thought I was going to break the brake pedal, and it wasn't stopping. And come to find out, they put treadle backs up. Mine's a 55, but it's like 223, so it's an earlier 55, and they still had treadle backs on there. And when those things,
you have the 6-inch one. You have the big one.
and when they lock up, they will gall and freeze. And I was probably putting 600 or 800 pounds pressure on that pedal, and I stopped the car with gears and an emergency brake.
Yeah,
it's not fun.
I had kind of a different problem with mine. I rebuilt it 2 or 3 times. I always carried a kit for it, but mine had the original brake shoes on it, and they were metallic linings, and there was a hard metallic lining on half of the shoe and an even harder one on the rest of the shoe. And if the brakes were cold, and cold wasn't unusual in Minnesota, the braking was really erratic. And so after a while, you would learn. I learned if you decided you were going to have to use the brakes, drag your foot on the brakes for a little while to get the shoes hot, and then you had good brakes. They were really good brakes once they were hot, but cold, you never had any idea which one's going to grab first. It was just, they were terrible linings. I joke I never had brakes until Lynn Yackel put softer linings on the shoes, and it actually behaved like there were brakes on the car.
So Dean, as an owner of an early car, mine's 47, as you probably remember. I learned a lot. So first of all, thank you for doing this. And I learned a lot about early cars that I didn't know with your talk. So thanks for doing that. And in fact, I had my treadle vac rebuilt by a guy in Florida who does nothing but treadle vacs. There's a service there that he does, because there's a lot of American cars that have treadle vacs as well. So
and I recommend that because they test them on a bench as well too. They know exactly what they're looking for when they test it. So.
And it's not that expensive, but I put mine in. But I found that the solenoid in the treadle vac, there's a solenoid in there that closes off the vacuum when the car is sitting, and it's very sensitive. And the treadle vac pedal doesn't always return all the way to the top to energize that solenoid. And if you let the car sit for a while, it'll drain the battery down. And my battery kept going down over and over and over again. I couldn't find it. And finally, one day I charged the battery and I stepped on the pedal and I heard this click. Oh, what's that? Oh, click. Every time I step on it, you hear the click, and that's the solenoid. And then I realized the solenoid wasn't being energized. So I could not get the pedal adjusted. So I'm going to tell the tale of my car. I had an old bed spring in my spring box, and I put a bed spring underneath the pedal, one big round spring between the pedal and the floor, and now it stays all the way up, and no more problem. So you look at my car and see this big spring under the pedal. That's why it's there.
Is that an original Mercedes part?
Oh yeah, yes. So, but I learned so much. So thanks. We'll have to compare further notes.
So there's a little ball joint at the end of the rod where the pedal is. So you want to make sure that's tight so it doesn't come off.
Yes.
Then you'll have no brake.
Yes. Oh yeah. When that throttle back, if it doesn't work, boy, you have no brakes. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, that's the problem.
Or if the engine dies and you step on the brake, you have maybe one half a push, and then the rest of it's just pure brute
But when it works, it's really good. Mine, I used to put, it sat during the winter because it was so cold. I rarely started it in the winter, but I could park it in the fall, and in the spring, the first time I hit without the engine running, I could hit the brake, and there was still vacuum, and the brakes would still actuate, the treadle back would still actuate the brakes, and you could hear the vacuum. It was still there.
Yes.
It amazed me that it didn't leak away, over the winter. It's crazy.
Are there other questions out there?
Just one, Dean. I'm a Roadster owner, and my understanding, the Gull Wings are like cookie makers. Are so hot. What's your experience with belly pans and Gull Wings and getting fried like an egg?
So, getting fried like an egg is pretty much the description. It's a very warm car, with or without the belly pans. It's pretty warm in the inside. And the only fix I found is, you take the vent wings and you turn them all the way around so they're blowing on your face. And I tried insulating some spots. I'm adding more insulation as I do this work, and I'm hopeful. But basically you're sitting surrounded by a hot transmission, hot engine, and hot rear axle behind you, and then the exhaust pipe goes down. The poor passengers got an even worse situation because they're being cooked by the exhaust going by the side.
And why does the Roadster run cooler, or is it just because you can open the top and let the heat
I think I'm not a Roadster expert at all, but I suspect having a more open car, and maybe maybe they were able to do something with the airflow around the exhaust system or something. I'm not sure.
No.
Dean, can I come in?
Yeah.
As owning a Gull Wing and a Roadster, they're both bad. I don't think a Roadster is any better than a Gull Wing. And that whole hot thing about Gull Wings, I find a little bit to be a fallacy. Yes, they got really hot by the 70s and 80s and 90s because all the original insulation was this foam stuff that literally fell out in your hands and turned to dust.
Good point.
And if in some of my restoration work, I put a light in the engine compartment and then go into the interior. And if I can see the light, you better start insulating. But it makes a lot of insulation, makes the Gull Wing and the Roadster just a whole lot nicer car to drive.
Yeah, I had a comment on that. When I had mine up at Albrecht's, because I didn't bother to change the oil in the differential often enough. That's another story. I told him that any place he could put modern, that aluminized insulation that they put in modern cars, I said, any place that you can fit it in and put it in, period. And so, and like on the aluminum shell for the passenger compartment, we had it on both sides, both on the outside and on the inside, and that has helped a lot.
Yeah,
So
my car. That's good stuff. I think it's called Dynamite or something like that. There's
Dynamite.
companies. Yeah, Dynamite.
Could I come in here, Patrick? The bonnet or the hood has not got vents in it. When you're going at speed, the heat goes out through the side vents, But when you're going at slow speed, it builds up, and there is no way for that heat to get out. Now, when you come in after a hot run, and you feel up under the dash, a lot of the heat comes in behind the speedo, up where the fuses are, and that piece is just a single piece of metal. There is no insulation from that, whereas the cockpit is double, it is a double cockpit. The other place it comes in, I think, is where your air comes in up near your knees. From where the heater controls are, you actually have a flexible hose which is uninsulated. And I think that insulation around there would also help.
So let me back up a second. Mercedes was aware that it was going to be pretty hot inside the car. And if you have an early car, a lot of the parts are hand fabricated that I'm going to describe. So the firewall is actually a double wall. It has, there's two aluminum sheets that are separated. They're probably about 1 centimeter apart. And there's a bunch of aluminum tin work near the firewall that brings cold air, not cold air, that's the problem, brings air in from the front ducts all the way into this firewall compartment. And when you take it all apart, you can it didn't fit well at all on these early cars, but like mine, the parts are all scribe marked, and then they were cut and bent to fit and bolted into place or glued into place or puttied into place. But they actually directed airflow into this double wall firewall, trying to take some of the heat away. But even with that, you know, it's a hot car. And up in the front, you know, there's two big ducts that the two air intake ducts come into the grill area, and then they must have decided that those were not quite big enough or were not collecting enough air. There's actually little extension pieces that screw on there with little tiny screws. And I defy most people to ever find those in the shop, I mean, in the parts manual, but they're there. And I think they really struggled trying to bring cool air coming in the front all the way into the firewall and then into the car. And however you cut it, it's still hot.
Can I add one thing?
Sure, go to go, Mark.
Yeah, it just from something simple that anyone can do. If the belly pans are on, the summer driving wants you to take the windows out. Don't do it. It's a lot cooler with the windows in place. And I'm assuming we're not stop and go red light driving, but you're on an interstate or freeway or better than that. And the air will come through, because what happens is the hot air goes out the vents, the gills. And if you have the windows out, it comes straight into the cabin. Not good. So with the windows in, the vent windows open, that's as good as you can get with or without your extra insulation, which is always a plus for sure.
The other thing that I found out, and many of us have, is that the petcocks that turn off the hot water flow to the heater radiators are leak like a sieve. You know, you think they're all the way off, but they're not. And so I ended up actually putting a complete valve, a ball valve that I can reach under the hood and either turn the whole system on or off. And if it's during the summer, that sucker's off.
So I did the same thing. I did the same thing to my car. In fact, I've got one that has a lever on it. It's an absolute full off, and you can run a cable right up through on the passenger side, right up through and around underneath the dash. And I now have a pull knob under the dash that can open and close that lever, which goes down around the tube by underneath the generator. Or the alternator. I have an alternator in my car, so underneath the alternator. So same idea though, but it's a little different. But it shuts off the whole system.
Yeah. Any other questions?
The other thing I would add is one of the things I did mention about early cars, the belly pans were evolving, and so were the vent locations in the belly pans. None of them seem to improve the temperature inside the cabin very much. But when you start looking at early car belly pans, you'll see an evolution taking place. None of them made them any easier to take off the car or put on the car, but they were trying to cool various areas underneath the hood and underneath the transmission, underneath the rear axle. So the pans I have are an early set. They have different locations than what you see in the later production pans, what I call production pans. If you look at a real early car, like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, they're like they came from another planet practically in terms of where all this stuff's located. So they were struggling with the heating, and somehow they missed the drain plugs. You know, I've got a couple places I can't get to without taking the pan off, and then the later cars have a little door there or something. So the way it works.
It was a fantastic talk. I appreciated it very much. I can't work with my hands. I can point to my mechanic. So I have a lot of respect for somebody that, you know, has the skills that you've developed, and it was really enjoyable hearing you. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Keep those, send in those pluses and minuses, everyone, so that we can keep improving this for the next one.
And I'd encourage you, those of you that get on the talk group, put some comments on what you heard and what you thought of it, so we get the word out to everybody else. So
yes, as the founder of the talk group, I urge everybody who is not on the talk group to get on it, because there's a lot of good stuff there too.
Andrew, you want to finish us up?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to, you know, obviously, first and foremost, thank you to Dean for being our first member Spotlight individual. And then thanks for everyone who's joined. We really appreciate you joining tonight. And if you have thoughts or comments, please feel free to send them directly to me or John or Dean or whomever you like, or even share the information and the wealth of knowledge that you learned here today on the talk group. And we do have plans for doing more. So if you have additional members that you'd like to have us host or highlight, please let me know or someone know, and we'll investigate that. So thank you much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Have a good evening, or if you're in Australia, have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Good day.
Andrew.
Bye now.